The town square was alive with excitement that day. Children ran around, laughing and playing, while vendors shouted cheerfully, trying to sell their colorful goods. The smell of freshly baked bread and sweet pastries filled the air, mixing with the scent of flowers from the nearby market stalls. People moved through the square in small groups, chatting and greeting neighbors they had not seen in a while. It was the kind of day that made the town feel warm and alive, a day when everyone felt a little lighter and happier. In the middle of the square, near the fountain that had stood there for generations, a figure appeared carrying an old piano. The instrument was worn but still shone under the sunlight, its polished surface reflecting the bustling scene around it. The figure was modestly dressed, wearing simple clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over their face. Nobody seemed to know who this person was. Some curious onlookers stopped and watched, whispering to each other about what was happening. "Who is that?" one person asked, nudging a friend. "I don't know," the friend replied. "But I've never seen them before. Maybe they are part of the festival entertainment." The figure carefully set up the piano on the square's stone pavement, making sure everything was stable. A few children gathered close, their eyes wide with curiosity, while adults moved a little nearer, some out of curiosity and others out of mild skepticism. The crowd started to form naturally, creating a rough circle around the piano. Some people leaned on the fountain railing, trying to get a better view, while others whispered doubts to their companions. "Do you really think they can play well?" a man asked his wife, raising an eyebrow. "I don't know," she said quietly. "They don't look like much, do they?" There was a mix of amusement and skepticism in the crowd. Some were ready to be entertained, while others seemed almost certain that the performance would be nothing special. The figure, however, did not react to the whispers or the doubtful looks. Calmly and with quiet confidence, the pianist lifted the lid of the piano and sat down on the bench. Their fingers hovered just above the keys, and for a moment, there was complete silence around the square, as if everyone was holding their breath in anticipation. A soft breeze moved through the crowd, rustling the papers of the vendors' stands and making the children's hair dance in the sunlight. The sound of distant laughter and chatter faded slightly as people focused on the figure at the piano. The pianist took a deep breath and placed their fingers gently on the keys. There was a pause, long enough for the crowd to start murmuring again, some in doubt, some in curiosity. "Well, let's see if they can actually play," a young woman said, crossing her arms. The first notes were quiet and simple. They were not immediately impressive, just clear enough to hear over the hum of the crowd. A few people chuckled softly, shaking their heads at the modest beginning. Some leaned closer, hoping to catch something interesting, while others muttered under their breath about how they had been right to doubt the performer. The children, however, seemed fascinated. They stayed closer, staring at the piano keys and the fingers moving delicately over them. The pianist did not rush. Each note was placed carefully, almost as if speaking a word at a time in a story only they knew. There was no sign of hesitation in their posture, no awkwardness in their movements, just calm, steady focus. The crowd started to notice that even in those simple first notes, there was something unusual. It was not loud or showy, but there was a clarity and control that hinted at something more than ordinary. "Maybe they aren't so bad," someone whispered, though their voice was unsure. The statement was more a question than a declaration, and it reflected a change in the atmosphere. People who had been openly doubtful now tilted their heads, listening more carefully. The air around the square felt charged, like something was about to happen that nobody could fully anticipate. As the pianist continued, the music began to flow more smoothly. The notes connected in a way that made people pause and listen more intently. Even those who had been skeptical found themselves drawn in, caught by the rhythm and gentle patterns emerging from the piano. The simple melody started to feel richer, more alive, as if it was telling a story that words could not express. An older man in the crowd, who had been shaking his head at first, stopped mid-chuckle. His eyes narrowed slightly as he tried to understand what he was hearing. The young woman who had crossed her arms earlier let out a small gasp and leaned forward, surprised at the growing depth of the music. The children's eyes widened in amazement, and even the vendors paused in their work to listen. The pianist's hands moved with a quiet elegance, each finger pressing the keys with precision and care. The music was soft, yet it had a presence that seemed to fill the entire square. People began to forget their doubts, captivated by the beauty of the notes. A few whispered to their neighbors, amazed at how skillful the performer was. The initial judgment that had been passed so quickly was beginning to fade, replaced by curiosity and wonder. The sunlight shifted as the day moved on, casting long shadows across the square. Birds landed briefly on the fountain, singing in harmony with the piano's gentle melody. The crowd, now completely focused on the performance, felt a connection to the music that went beyond mere entertainment. It was as if the pianist was speaking to each person individually, touching emotions they hadn't expected to feel. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed at the pianist. "Look at their hands. They move so fast," he exclaimed quietly, awe in his voice. His mother nodded, a smile forming on her face. "I think we were wrong to doubt them," she said softly. The crowd's energy shifted gradually. Where there had been whispers of doubt, there was now a quiet attention, a respectful stillness. People who had come to watch casually were now witnesses to something that felt important, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. The pianist's music had begun to bridge the gap between strangers, bringing everyone together in a shared moment of surprise and admiration. Even though the performance had just started, it was clear that this was no ordinary pianist. The figure at the piano was completely immersed in their own world, yet their music reached out to the crowd, inviting each listener to experience it with them. Doubts that had seemed so certain a few minutes ago were disappearing, replaced by a sense of anticipation and quiet excitement. The first part of the performance ended with a gentle flourish, the notes lingering in the air like a soft echo. The crowd paused, as if not wanting to break the spell that had been created. Some clapped politely, while others simply stood in silence, staring at the pianist in amazement. The modest figure at the piano did not look around or smile. They simply adjusted their position slightly and prepared to continue, ready to take the audience further into the world they were creating with every key they touched. In that moment, the town square had transformed. What had started as a normal, cheerful day had become something unforgettable. People had come expecting nothing more than a simple performance, perhaps even some amusement at a novice player. Instead, they found themselves facing a mystery, a hidden talent that challenged their assumptions and captured their full attention. The stage was set, and the crowd, once full of doubt, was now ready to be amazed. The first notes had barely faded when the pianist's hands moved again, this time with more confidence and grace. The melody grew smoother, flowing across the keys like a gentle river. People in the crowd leaned in, instinctively trying to catch every sound. Their initial doubt, which had seemed so certain, was melting away as the music began to tell a story they had not expected to hear. A young boy in the front row pressed his hands together and watched in fascination, his eyes wide. He had never seen anyone play like this before. Each note seemed to carry emotion, as if the pianist was speaking without words. The adults around him began to notice the same thing. The music was no longer simple or hesitant. It was deliberate, expressive, and full of feeling. Even the skeptics could not ignore the skill and control displayed on the worn keys. Some people whispered to one another, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. "Do you hear that?" one woman asked, her voice trembling slightly with surprise. "It's incredible." "I know," her friend replied. "I thought they couldn't play at all, but listen to this." The pianist's hands moved with steady precision, each finger pressing the keys in perfect harmony. The melody changed subtly, introducing softer tones and more complex patterns. The crowd noticed the variation, sensing the depth behind each note. What had begun as a simple, cautious performance was transforming into something that touched the heart. The music seemed to carry a story of hope and sadness, joy and longing, all woven into a tapestry of sound that captivated everyone within earshot. An older man, leaning heavily on his walking stick, stopped mid-step. He had come to the festival simply to enjoy the sun and the food, not expecting a performance that would leave him so absorbed. Yet now he stood silently, listening intently, feeling emotions he could not name. He glanced around at the other spectators and realized they were all experiencing the same thing. An unspoken connection formed by the music that reached beyond words. Even the children, who had been the most openly curious at the beginning, were now completely still. Their playful chatter had disappeared, replaced by a quiet awe. One little girl held her mother's hand tightly, not wanting to move, as if she feared the magic of the music might vanish if she looked away. The pianist's fingers danced across the keys, shifting effortlessly between soft, tender notes and stronger, more dramatic ones. Each change carried a feeling, a message that only the music could convey. The crowd's energy shifted again. Where there had been laughter and whispers, now there was a hushed anticipation. People exchanged glances, some with smiles of amazement and others with open mouths of surprise. The atmosphere in the square had transformed completely. What had seemed like a casual street performance had become a moment of shared wonder and discovery. The pianist's talent was undeniable, and it was unfolding right before their eyes. A young woman near the edge of the crowd pulled her scarf closer around her shoulders, feeling chills despite the warm day. She could not explain why the music affected her so deeply, but she felt it tug at her heart. She looked around and saw that others were reacting in similar ways. Even those who had doubted the performer were now silent, caught in the spell of the melody that filled the square. The pianist's expression remained calm, almost serene. They did not seem to notice the reactions around them. Their focus was entirely on the music, each movement of their hands precise and intentional. It was as if the world had narrowed down to the piano and the notes flowing from it. The crowd, mesmerized, could only watch and listen, suspended in a moment that seemed timeless. The music began to change again, this time growing more complex. Layers of sound intertwined, creating harmonies that were rich and full. Some in the audience recognized familiar patterns from classical pieces, but there was a uniqueness to the performance that made it unlike anything they had heard before. The pianist was not simply playing the notes. They were telling a story, one that seemed to speak directly to each person in the square. A man standing near a fruit stall muttered quietly, "I can't believe I thought they couldn't play. This is beautiful." He shook his head in disbelief, a smile spreading across his face. The woman beside him nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. Even in this crowded, noisy square, the music had created a private, intimate moment for each listener. As the melody continued, the pianist introduced subtle changes in tempo and rhythm. The crowd sensed the emotion behind each shift, feeling the music resonate in their own experiences. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others simply watched, captivated by the skill and passion that seemed to radiate from the performer. The square was quiet except for the piano, every other noise fading into the background. The children, who had been fidgeting at the start, now stood completely still. They watched the pianist's hands with fascination, trying to follow every movement. Their faces reflected awe and curiosity, and for a moment, it seemed that even they understood the depth of the performance. The adults noticed the children's reactions and smiled, realizing that the music had the power to touch people of all ages. A group of teenagers leaned against a railing, sharing whispered comments. "Did you expect this?" one asked. "No way. I thought it was going to be boring, but this is amazing." The others nodded in agreement, their eyes glued to the piano as the notes continued to flow. The pianist's hands moved faster now, but every note was controlled, precise, and full of meaning. The melody rose and fell, carrying the audience along on a journey they had not anticipated. People felt emotions they had not expected to feel: joy, nostalgia, and even a touch of sadness. The music seemed to reach into their hearts, connecting them in a way that words never could. The crowd began to lean forward instinctively, drawn closer by the beauty and intensity of the performance. Some whispered quietly to each other, trying to put into words what they were experiencing, but the words always fell short. The music said more than they could express, and they realized that it was enough to simply listen and feel. The sunlight shifted again, casting long shadows across the square, but nobody seemed to notice. Their focus was entirely on the pianist and the story unfolding through the piano. The gentle breeze carried the notes in all directions, touching everyone present. Even the vendors who had been busy with their stalls paused, enchanted by the unexpected brilliance of the performance. The pianist did not rush. Every pause and every note had a purpose. The audience could sense the intention behind the music, feeling the care and thoughtfulness that went into each moment. The performance was no longer just about skill. It was about emotion, about connecting with the people who had gathered to watch. The pianist's ability to convey feeling without words left the crowd in silent admiration. As the second part of the performance drew on, the square seemed transformed. People who had doubted or laughed at the beginning were now completely absorbed. Their skepticism had vanished, replaced by wonder and a growing sense of respect for the mysterious performer. Even those who had never cared much for music found themselves caught up in the experience, touched by something they could not fully explain. The melody grew softer for a moment, delicate and gentle, like a whisper. The crowd leaned in, sensing the intimacy of the sound. Some closed their eyes, letting the music speak directly to their hearts. The children's expressions were filled with curiosity and awe, while the adults felt a quiet pride in witnessing something so extraordinary. When the soft passage ended, the pianist did not stop. The music shifted again, more confident, more expressive, and the audience felt a surge of energy. The performance had taken them on an unexpected journey, moving seamlessly from doubt to curiosity to admiration. Every note, every pause, every movement of the pianist's hands told a story that words could never capture. For a moment, the square was completely silent except for the piano. Then, without realizing it, the crowd had been transformed. People who had doubted, questioned, or simply watched casually were now witnesses to something magical. The music had the power to change their perception, to make them realize that talent and beauty can come from the most unexpected places. The pianist, still focused and serene, continued to play, unaware of the effect they were having, but fully committed to the story they were telling through their fingers. The music continued to flow from the piano, growing richer and more intricate with every passing moment. The pianist's fingers moved faster now, yet every note landed with precision, perfectly measured, perfectly intentional. The crowd had fallen into a silent trance, watching and listening in complete awe. No one spoke, no one moved, and even the usual background noises of the town square seemed to fade into nothingness. It was as if the music itself had created a bubble around everyone, a world separate from the bustling life outside. Some people began to whisper softly, trying to comprehend what they were hearing. "This is unbelievable," one person said, their voice almost lost in the notes. "I never imagined someone could play like this in the square." Others shook their heads in disbelief, unable to accept that such talent could be hidden beneath simple clothing and a wide-brimmed hat. The modest appearance of the pianist had initially led many to dismiss them, yet every doubt was now being erased by the unfolding brilliance. The music was more than just sound. It was an expression of life, of emotion, of something deeply human that reached directly into the hearts of the listeners. The pianist's hands moved with elegance, gliding over the keys as though they were painting colors in the air. The melody swelled and softened in waves, rising to crescendos that sent shivers through the crowd and falling to gentle whispers that made the listeners hold their breath. Each note seemed to tell a part of a story that the audience could not see but could feel deeply. Faces in the crowd reflected astonishment, wonder, and sometimes tears, as if the music was pulling them into memories, dreams, and emotions they had not accessed for years. An older woman near the fountain clasped her hands together tightly, her eyes glistening. She could not stop thinking about how wrong she had been to doubt the pianist. The music touched something inside her, something she had almost forgotten amid the ordinary routines of life. It reminded her of her youth, of days filled with hope and dreams, and she could not help but be overwhelmed by the sheer beauty of the performance. Even the children seemed entranced, their small faces lit with amazement. One boy, who had been restless only minutes earlier, now leaned forward, eyes fixed on the pianist's fingers, trying to follow every movement. He could sense the story in the music, even if he didn't understand it fully. The younger ones held onto their parents' hands, feeling the emotions ripple through them and sharing the silent understanding that something extraordinary was happening. The pianist's expression remained calm, yet there was a quiet intensity in their eyes. They were fully immersed in the music, completely present in the moment, and yet each note was crafted to reach the crowd. There was a careful thought behind every chord, every pause, every flourish. The performance was not only a display of skill but a conversation between the pianist and everyone gathered around. It was as if they were speaking directly to each person, telling a story without words, using only the language of music. The melody took unexpected turns, shifting from delicate, soft passages to bold, powerful sequences. The crowd felt each transition as if it mirrored the ups and downs of their own lives. Whispers of admiration spread quietly, though no one wanted to break the spell of the music. Even those who had been the loudest skeptics at the beginning were now completely absorbed, their doubts replaced with awe and respect. The pianist's ability to convey such emotion through the keys was undeniable, and it left everyone wondering how someone so unassuming could possess such talent. A young man, standing near a fruit stall, clutched his hat tightly and closed his eyes, letting the music envelop him. He could feel the rhythm in his chest, the subtle shifts in harmony pulling at his emotions. He opened his eyes briefly, watching the pianist's hands dance over the keys, and then closed them again, surrendering completely to the beauty of the performance. Around him, others did the same, caught in a shared moment of reverence and awe. The complexity of the music deepened. The pianist began to weave familiar patterns into the composition, fragments that reminded some listeners of famous classical pieces. Yet every element carried a new twist, a fresh expression that was uniquely theirs. The crowd noticed this subtle genius, feeling the skill and thought behind every note. What had begun as a casual performance was now a demonstration of extraordinary mastery, and the audience could sense the depth of experience and dedication that had brought the pianist to this moment. The children whispered to each other in hushed tones, amazed by the speed and accuracy of the fingers that flew across the keys. They pointed and gasped quietly, trying to take in every movement. The adults, equally mesmerized, could only watch in admiration, some leaning slightly forward to get a better view, as if proximity could somehow make them understand the full magic of what they were witnessing. The pianist's hands seemed to move on their own, guided by an inner rhythm and understanding of the music that transcended explanation. The melody was no longer just beautiful. It had become alive, breathing through every note, reaching into the hearts of those who listened. The energy in the square shifted, transforming from curiosity to fascination, from skepticism to complete wonder. The music was a force that united everyone in the moment, dissolving all distractions and leaving only the connection between the pianist and the listeners. Even the merchants who had been busy attending to their stalls paused, caught by the powerful resonance of the piano. The smell of food and flowers faded into the background as the sound became the focal point, the center of attention that drew everyone in. The pianist did not rush or show off, yet the effect was profound, touching every person present in a way that words could never capture. The melody became more expressive, filled with subtle emotion and nuance. The pianist shifted the tempo, slowing at times to draw out the gentle sorrow in a passage, then speeding up to convey excitement or triumph. The crowd could feel each change, sensing the intent and thought behind every decision. They were not merely hearing music. They were experiencing it, living it with every beat of their hearts. A woman in the crowd, holding a small child, felt tears prick at her eyes. She had come to the festival expecting a light, entertaining performance, perhaps even a moment of amusement. Instead, she found herself deeply moved, confronted with a display of pure, unfiltered emotion through sound. She looked around and saw that others were experiencing the same feelings, and a sense of shared humanity filled the square, connecting strangers in a silent bond forged by the music. The pianist's focus never wavered. Their eyes sometimes closed, sometimes opened, but their hands moved with unwavering precision and expression. The music became a dialogue between performer and audience, an exchange of emotion that required no words. Every chord, every key, every pause spoke volumes, telling stories that each listener interpreted in their own way. The crowd leaned in, unable to resist the pull of the melody. Their earlier skepticism had vanished completely. The simple appearance of the pianist, once a cause for doubt, was now irrelevant. What mattered was the music, the skill, and the emotion it carried. Each listener felt a personal connection, as if the pianist had reached inside their soul and touched something hidden, something that had been waiting for this moment to be revealed. The square, alive with activity only moments ago, now felt transformed. The music had created a quiet world within a bustling town, a space where only the piano and its mysterious player existed. People forgot about their errands, their conversations, even their surroundings, completely absorbed in the unfolding performance. The pianist had turned a simple square into a place of wonder, a place where doubts were silenced and hearts were opened. As the music reached a particularly powerful section, the crowd felt a collective gasp, a sense of astonishment that they could not contain. The pianist's fingers flew across the keys with unmatched speed and accuracy, yet each note was perfectly placed, creating a harmony that was both complex and profoundly moving. The performance had reached a new level, one that left everyone in awe, realizing that they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. The children's wide eyes mirrored the astonishment of the adults. They clung to the edges of their parents' hands, sensing the gravity of the moment, trying to take in every detail. The adults, equally captivated, found themselves holding their breath, fully aware that the music was speaking to them in a way that transcended words. They felt emotions rise and fall within them, carried by the notes that flowed endlessly from the piano. The pianist's calm demeanor contrasted with the intensity of the music. Their focus was absolute, their connection to the piano total, yet they remained modest and unassuming. The crowd, initially doubtful, had no choice but to recognize the brilliance of the performer. The music had transformed skepticism into admiration, uncertainty into awe, and a casual gathering into a moment of collective revelation. As the performance continued, the piano became more than an instrument. It was a voice, a storyteller, and the pianist was the messenger. The melody wrapped around the audience, embracing them, guiding them through emotions they did not know they carried. The magic of the music was undeniable, and every person present felt privileged to witness it, knowing that such moments were rare and unforgettable. The music had reached a point where every person in the square was completely captivated. The pianist's fingers moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, producing notes that were at once powerful and delicate. The melody carried a depth of emotion that left the audience breathless. People stopped mid-step, mid-conversation, and mid-laughter to focus entirely on the sound that filled the air. The square, once lively with casual chatter and playful activity, had transformed into a quiet sanctuary where the only language spoken was music. Some of the listeners felt tears rise unbidden. The melody stirred memories and emotions they had long tucked away. An older man, who had been skeptical at the beginning, wiped his eyes discreetly, feeling a surge of nostalgia for moments of his youth. A young woman felt her heart tighten, sensing a joy and sadness mingled together in the music that mirrored her own experiences. Even children, usually full of energy and chatter, were still caught in the spell that the pianist had woven around them. The pianist's movements were calm and measured, yet the music was anything but restrained. Each note carried emotion, sometimes soft and tender, sometimes powerful and commanding. The transitions between passages were seamless, flowing naturally as if the melody had a life of its own. The audience could feel the story unfolding, even if they could not see it or put it into words. It was a story of hope, struggle, joy, and longing, all told through the keys of an old piano. A small boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, it's like the piano is talking to us." She smiled softly and nodded, feeling the truth of his words. The music spoke directly to each person, bypassing the need for language, reaching straight into their hearts. Every person in the crowd felt something different, yet the connection was shared. There was a quiet understanding among the listeners that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that could not be replicated easily. The pianist added subtle flourishes to the melody, small variations that made each note seem alive. The crowd noticed these details, leaning closer to hear the nuances, to catch the subtleties that made the performance so mesmerizing. Every movement of the pianist's hands seemed perfectly intentional, yet effortless. It was a display of skill, yes, but more than that, it was a display of deep emotional understanding and connection. People who had doubted at the start now exchanged glances filled with admiration. The expressions of skepticism had been replaced by wide-eyed wonder, by silent applause in the hearts of the audience. Some whispered quietly to one another, trying to express the feelings that words could not capture. "It's incredible," one man murmured. "I never thought I'd hear something like this in the square." The children in the front sat cross-legged on the ground, their faces lit with awe. One little girl rested her chin on her hands, eyes following the pianist's every movement. Her excitement was silent but unmistakable. The young boy beside her could barely contain his curiosity, leaning forward to get a better view of the hands that seemed to move faster than he could track. Even the adults were drawn into the same fascination, some closing their eyes to focus purely on the music. The melody began to build, layering harmonies and rhythms in ways that the crowd could feel as much as hear. The music rose and fell like waves, swelling with intensity and receding with tenderness. The audience felt the emotion carried in every note, experiencing it as if it were their own. Some felt joy, others nostalgia. Some felt a quiet sadness, yet all were united by the shared experience. It was a moment of connection, a rare and precious feeling that seemed to suspend time itself. The pianist's expression remained composed, but there was a subtle intensity in their eyes. They were entirely focused, yet completely aware of the audience. Every note was deliberate, yet every gesture seemed natural, unforced. The square became a stage not just for performance but for shared emotion, a place where strangers could feel together, even without speaking. The music's power grew. The pianist transitioned seamlessly between soft, gentle passages and stronger, more dramatic sequences. The audience could sense the narrative in the performance, the ebb and flow of emotion that mirrored the ups and downs of life itself. People felt the music resonate deep within them, stirring feelings they had long forgotten or never fully understood. The piano had become a storyteller, and the pianist, a guide through an invisible landscape of emotion. Even the vendors and passers-by who had initially ignored the performance were now caught in the spell. Some paused their work, leaning against stalls to listen, enchanted by the unexpected brilliance. Others stopped mid-stride, staring at the pianist as if seeing them for the first time. The music was powerful enough to still the town square, to make people forget their errands, their chatter, their daily worries, if only for a while. The children whispered among themselves, pointing at the hands moving across the keys. "Look at how fast they move," one boy said, eyes wide with admiration. "It's amazing." The adults smiled quietly, noticing how the performance was not only captivating them but inspiring the young ones as well. There was a shared sense of wonder, a feeling that they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. The pianist shifted to a softer, more intimate melody. The crowd leaned in instinctively, as if drawn by a magnetic force. The gentle notes seemed to speak directly to each listener, evoking personal memories and emotions. Tears glimmered in some eyes, smiles appeared on others, but all shared the same quiet, profound respect for the music. The performance had moved beyond mere skill. It had become a deeply human experience. As the music continued, the audience felt the climax approaching. The melody grew more intricate, the rhythms more complex, yet the pianist maintained perfect control. Every note was precise, every chord deliberate, and yet the sound felt alive, breathing, and full of emotion. The crowd could sense the journey that the pianist was taking them on, the story that was being told without words, and they hung on every note, completely absorbed. The music rose to a peak, a powerful and moving moment that seemed to touch every heart in the square. The crowd collectively held their breath, feeling the intensity of the performance. Every face showed awe, some showing tears, some wide-eyed wonder. The piano sound carried through the square, echoing against the walls of nearby buildings, wrapping everyone in a cocoon of emotion. When the powerful passage softened again, the crowd exhaled almost simultaneously, as if released from a shared tension. The children looked up at the pianist with amazement, some whispering to one another about how incredible it was. Adults shook their heads in disbelief, realizing how wrong they had been to doubt the performer. Even the most skeptical voices were silent, overwhelmed by the raw emotion and skill before them. The pianist's hands moved with a gentle elegance now, guiding the audience through the final passages of the performance. Every note seemed to linger in the air, a soft echo of the story that had been told. People could feel the emotion radiating from the music, a connection that went beyond sight or sound, reaching directly to the soul. The square was filled with a profound stillness, a shared respect and admiration that transcended words. When the final note faded, the square remained silent for a heartbeat longer. It was a silence of awe, of appreciation, of hearts touched by something extraordinary. The audience slowly began to clap, some hesitantly at first, then with growing intensity as they recognized the rare talent they had witnessed. Children cheered quietly, adults clapped and murmured their admiration, and a sense of reverent excitement filled the air. The performance had not only silenced doubt but had united everyone in a moment of shared wonder and emotion. After the final note lingered in the air, the square remained in a moment of stunned silence. The music had stopped, but its echo still seemed to hang in the hearts of everyone present. People slowly began to clap, some hesitantly at first, as if unsure whether to break the spell. Then the applause grew louder, more confident, a wave of appreciation that swept across the crowd. Children cheered quietly, their excitement bubbling over in soft giggles, while adults clapped and whispered words of admiration. The energy in the square had transformed completely from doubt to awe, from curiosity to deep respect. The pianist rose from the bench calmly, almost humbly, and gave a small nod to the audience. They did not smile broadly or seek praise. Instead, they quietly began to pack up their piano, as if the performance had been its own reward. The crowd watched, some trying to approach, some simply staring, caught in a mixture of amazement and curiosity. Questions buzzed silently through the air. Who was this person? How had they learned to play so beautifully? And why had they chosen to perform in the square in such a simple disguise? People edged closer, hoping to catch a glimpse of the performer's face, to find some hint of their identity. But the pianist moved with quiet efficiency, folding the sheet music carefully, checking the instrument, and gently securing it for transport. Despite the modesty of their appearance, there was a commanding presence, a quiet strength that had captivated the crowd from the very first notes. A young boy stepped forward, clutching his mother's hand. "That was amazing!" he exclaimed, his eyes shining with wonder. "Can I learn to play like that someday?" The mother smiled, squeezing his hand and whispering, "Maybe one day, yes. But today, you just witnessed something very special." The boy nodded, still staring at the piano as if it held some secret magic. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but their conversations were filled with excitement and admiration. People spoke of the performance in hushed tones, almost as if afraid to break the delicate feeling that lingered. Some praised the skill, others marveled at the emotional depth, and many reflected on how they had misjudged the pianist's talent based on appearance alone. The lesson was clear. Extraordinary talent could come from the most unexpected places. A woman who had been doubtful from the start approached a man who had stood beside her. "I feel like we were wrong to judge them," she admitted softly. "They were more than anyone could have expected." The man nodded, his eyes still fixed on where the pianist had stood. "It makes you realize how often we doubt what we don't understand," he said quietly. As the pianist continued to pack, a few brave spectators stepped forward, hoping to express their gratitude directly. They offered words of praise, smiles, and even small gestures like a hand extended in admiration. The pianist accepted the recognition with a quiet nod, never speaking, never drawing attention to themselves. There was a humility that matched their skill, a balance between confidence and talent and a lack of desire for fame. Children lingered longer than anyone else, fascinated by the piano and the person who had created such wonder. They whispered to one another, recounting the parts they had loved most, comparing notes on how fast the fingers had moved and how beautiful the melodies had sounded. Their innocent excitement was contagious, and adults found themselves smiling as they watched the next generation be inspired by something so pure and genuine. Slowly, the square returned to its normal rhythm, but the memory of the performance stayed with everyone. People continued their errands and conversations, but there was a new lightness in their steps, a sense of having witnessed something rare and beautiful. The music had left a mark, a gentle reminder of the power of skill, passion, and the ability to surprise and move others in ways words cannot capture. Even after the pianist left the square, their presence lingered. Stories began to spread through the town, whispered conversations turning into shared tales. People spoke of the mysterious performer with admiration, recounting the beauty of the music, the control and emotion displayed, and the unexpected revelation that talent often comes in humble packages. The pianist became something of a legend, a figure who reminded the town that first impressions are not always accurate and that extraordinary abilities can hide in plain sight. The square itself seemed different after that day. People who returned found themselves looking at it with new appreciation, remembering the moment when the music had filled the air and captivated every heart present. Children who had witnessed the performance often returned, hoping to catch another glimpse or simply to feel again the magic that had seemed to hang in the very air around the piano. The impact of the performance went beyond mere admiration. It inspired others to explore their own talents and to take risks in sharing them. Musicians who had once been hesitant to play in public found courage, inspired by the idea that even in a simple disguise, talent could shine and touch lives. The memory of the mysterious pianist encouraged everyone to value skill, dedication, and emotional expression, reminding them that appearances could be deceiving and that greatness often comes quietly, without fanfare. Months later, people still spoke of that day. They recounted the performance to friends and family, often struggling to convey fully the depth and emotion they had felt. Yet everyone agreed on one thing. The pianist had changed their perception of art, talent, and human connection. The square, once a common place for everyday life, had become a symbol of wonder and possibility, a reminder that beauty and skill could surprise at any moment, even when least expected. In the end, the pianist's identity remained a mystery. No one knew their name, their background, or where they had learned such extraordinary skill. But that did not matter. The music, the emotion, and the moment had been enough. The crowd had learned to listen with open hearts, to appreciate without judgment, and to recognize that sometimes the most powerful experiences come quietly, from those who never seek attention or praise. The day ended, and life in the town returned to its usual rhythm. Vendors packed up, children played, and people went about their business. Yet the memory of the pianist lingered in their minds and hearts. For those who had witnessed the performance, it was more than music. It was a lesson, an experience, and a story that would be told for years to come. The crowd had questioned the disguised pianist, but in seconds, silence had turned doubt into admiration, skepticism into wonder, leaving a lasting impression that would never fade.